Good morning, dear students. Welcome to the science class. Today, we begin a new chapter, Chapter 7 Control and Coordination. This chapter, Control and Coordination, explains the controlled movement of organisms in detail. This chapter is covered under three different sections. The first section, the nervous system of animals, is covered in a comprehensive manner. Structure of neuron and the neuromuscular junction is presented. The term reflex arc is also defined in this chapter along with a suitable diagram. Further, the entire mechanism of the human brain is covered. Different parts of the brain and functions of each part are also explained in detail. The chapter Control and Coordination explains how different parts of the brain work in synchronization to carry out coordinated and controlled movements. This chapter lays emphasis on the coordination and control movements in plants. The process of immediate response to stimulus in case of plants, the movements of plants due to the growth and effect of environmental triggers on plants are extensively covered in this chapter. Towards the end of this chapter, few essential hormones in animals are also discussed. Endocrine glands in males and females are explained along with the diagrammatic view. Life processes involved in the maintenance functions in living organisms. If we see something moving, it is alive. Some of these movements are in fact the result of growth, as in plants. This we have studied in the last chapter. Some movements, as in many animals and some plants, are not connected with growth. Why do we associate such visible movements with life? A possible answer is that we think of movement as a response to a change in the environment of the organism. If you think a bit more about this, it becomes apparent that all these movements in response to the environment is carefully controlled. Each kind of a change in the environment evokes an appropriate movement in response. Living organisms must use systems providing control and coordination. In keeping with the general principles of body organization in multicellular organisms, specialized tissues are used to provide these control and coordination activities. In animals, such control and coordination are provided by nervous and muscular tissue. Touching a hot object is an urgent and dangerous situation for us. We need to detect it and respond to it. How do we detect that we are touching a hot object? All information from our environment is detected by the specialized tips of some nerve cells. So all information from our environment is detected by the specialized tips of some nerve cells. These receptors are usually located in our sense organs, such as the inner ear, the nose, the tongue, and so on. So gustatory receptors will detect taste, while olfactory receptors will detect smell. Let us see structure of neuron. The nervous tissue is made up of an organized network of nerve cells or neurons and is specialized for conducting information via electrical impulses from one part of the body to another part of the body. You can see this is the nucleus, this is dendrite, the cell body, axon, nerve ending. Look at the figure and identify the parts of a neuron where information is acquired. This is the place where the information is acquired, dendritic region. This is a region where information is acquired. Identify the parts in which information travels as an electrical impulse. So this is a region where the information travels as an electrical impulse. Identify the region where this impulse must be converted into chemical signal for onward transmission. This is the place where the electric impulse is converted to chemical signal. So this is the structure of neuron. The information acquired at the end of the dendritic tip of a nerve cell sets off a chemical reaction that creates an electrical impulse. The information acquired at the end of the dendritic tip of a nerve cell sets off a chemical reaction that creates an electrical impulse. This impulse travels from the dendrite to the cell body and then along the axon to its end. At the end of the axon, the electrical impulse sets off the release of some chemicals. The electric impulse is converted to chemical signal. These chemicals cross the gap or synapse and start a similar electrical impulse in a dendrite of the next neuron. So the junction between two nerve cells is called synapse. Once again, let us see the information acquired at the end of the dendritic tip of a nerve cell sets off a chemical reaction that creates an electrical impulse. This impulse travels from dendritic tip to the cell body and then along the axon to its end. At the end of the axon, the electric impulse sets off the release of some chemicals, and these chemicals cross the gap or synapse and start a similar electrical impulse in a dendrite of the next neuron. This is a general scheme of how nervous impulse travels in the body. A similar synapse finally allows delivery of such impulse from neuron to other cells such as muscle cells or gland. Let us see the reflex action. Reflex is a word we use very commonly when we talk about some sudden action in response to something in environment. We say, I jumped out of the way of the bus reflexively, or I pulled my hand back from the flame reflexively, or I was so hungry my mouth started watering reflexively. What exactly do we mean? A common idea in all such examples is that we do something without thinking about it or without feeling in control of our reactions. Yet these are situations where we are responding with some action to change to changes in our environment. How is control and coordination achieved in such situations? Touching a flame is an urgent and dangerous situation for us. How would we respond to this? Let us see. When we touch a hot object or when a pin pricks our finger, what is our immediate reaction? Of course, we remove our hand away from the source of pain, either the hot object or the pin. In situations like this, our reactions are always immediate, involuntary, and sudden. They happen without much of a thinking process. This action is called the reflex action. Here, the spinal cord has a major role to play. The reflex arc shows the pathway through which the reflex action occurs. The whole mechanism of reflex action occurs in such a fashion that there is no conscious control of the brain. So the reflex arc shows the pathway through which the reflex action occurs, and the whole mechanism of reflex action occurs in such a fashion that there is no conscious control of the brain. Stimulation occurs through the peripheral nervous system, and the response to this peripheral nerve stimulation is involuntary. In a reflex action, the spinal cord along with the brain stem is responsible for the reflex movements. Let us see an example. So reflex arc is the pathway of nerve involved in reflex action. Reflex arc is the pathway of nerve involved in reflex action. Reflex arc involves the receptor organ perceives the stimuli. This is a receptor organ. Here, the receptor organ receives the stimuli. Here, heat is the stimulus. They are situated on the sense organ. The receptor is situated on sense organ. Sensory neuron, this sensory neuron carries the message from the receptor to the central nervous system. The sensory neuron carries the message from the receptor to the central nervous system. Central nervous system processes the message and sends impulses to the concerned part of the body in the form of response through motor neuron. So central nervous system processes the message and sends impulses to the concerned part of the body in the form of responses through motor neuron. Motor neuron carries the message from the central nervous system to the effector. So this is the effector organ muscle in our arm is the effector organ here, and effector organ responses against the stimulus. The stimulus is received by the receptor through sensory neuron carries the message from the receptor to the central nervous system, and the central nervous system processes the message, and the motor neuron carries the message from the central nervous system to the effector organ, and the effector organ responds against the stimulus. This is the reflex arc. So reflex arc is the pathway of nerve involved in reflex action. Dear students, this is all for today's class. Hope you all have understood it. In the next class, you will learn about structure of brain. Till then, bye. Take care. Thank you.